groups of people emerged. Among one group who began to revile Suleiman and deny his prophethood and claim him to be a blameworthy magician, and we see that amongst them even now to this day. And another group saying that because Suleiman practiced magic, therefore magic is permissible and it is lawful. And we see that from that time, in the time of Suleiman, right through all the centuries, the Jews, we see that magic became part and parcel of their religion. And when they wrote the Talmud, and they, and also because the Jews were held captive by one of the kings of Babylon in the year 600. So this king, he was called Nebuchadnezzar, and he went to Jerusalem. He conquered the Jews. He took them back to Babylon. And when the Jews were in Babylon, on top of the magic they learned from Suleiman, they also learned the magic in Babylon, which the angels came with.
Assalamu alaikum warahmatullah. From the magic they learned, or the magic they learned from Suleiman. Okay, there was that preposition from directly attributes learning from that source. So, for example, if you came out of the kitchen and walked into the living room, and you said, "I've come from the kitchen," you couldn't have come from anywhere else because you've directly linked where you've exited from with the word from, the preposition from. That's the joining thing. You, the kitchen, we know where you came, where you exited, because you've used that term from.
On top of the magic they learned from Suleiman, they also learned the magic in Babylon, which the angels came with.
Yes, no misunderstanding. No, you could have come from anywhere else because you've clearly come from, with that key word, the kitchen. And he said the magic they learned from Suleiman, on top of the magic. So additional to the magic, they learned from. Who else did they learn the magic from then, if it wasn't from Suleiman in the statement that they've just mentioned? So the attribution to who they learned magic from means that he's attributed, it means that Suleiman knew magic or practiced magic. A'udhu billahi min dhalik. So that's very, very clear. There's no doubt in that statement there. You just play that clip and get them not to do any superfluous explanation, everything like that. The statement is there in itself. On top of the magic they learned from Suleiman. I'm going to repeat that, from Suleiman. From Suleiman. That means that Suleiman, according to that statement, practiced magic. A'udhu billahi min dhalik. High is he above any of the kufr and evil that have been attributed to him, intentionally or unintentionally. Ameen.
On top of the magic they learned from Suleiman, they also learned the magic in Babylon, which the angels came.
If it precedes it, if it comes after it, that's a statement and a clause that he's mentioned, and it refers specifically to magic learned from Suleiman. It's the beginning of a sentence. It doesn't matter what came before it, what comes after it. It's what is happening at that particular stage, which is undeniable. Why didn't he say the second one? If that's what he meant, why didn't he say that? And the slip of the tongue, there's a slip of the tongue, and he's brought that hadith there. Now, what needs to be done with that hadith about the Bedouin who finds his camel and makes the slip of the tongue? That's with regards to Allah's forgiveness of a slave who's made tawbah. Let's be clear on that now. Listen to me carefully. But that hadith is brought to say that Allah loves that his slave makes tawbah to the degree of the happiness of that man finding his camel at the point of death, and that ran off and that came back to him. So him just using it there, saying, and one is forgiven for that type of slip of the tongue. That individual, that example was given of the one who makes tawbah and Allah's pleasure with the one making tawbah. It is specific to that issue of repentance of the slave and Allah loving the slave's repentance. Now, we need ulama to bring a different context of that hadith of the man finding his camel to justify or support what Amjad Rafiq has done. He needs to be pulled up on that. So the slip of the tongue and bringing that hadith is defective because that hadith is regarding the one who makes tawbah. He hasn't made tawbah, and it was a public statement, and he needs to say that he was wrong and made tawbah instead of just glossing it over. And the second explanation, and when we go to second explanation, why is he giving an alternative explanation? Why is he bringing an or? Either you knew what you meant in the first place, and it was a slip of the tongue, for which you then need to apologize and retract that statement and clarify, and then that's it. That's the end of the matter. But you cannot just leave it by bringing a hadith that refers to tawbah, because you haven't clearly haven't made tawbah. You've just made it. It's automatic. Allah forgives. No, the hadith shows that Allah loves that his slave makes tawbah more than the individual who finds his lost camel. So that's the first point. The second point is, why would you then say, or I meant such and such about the Jews? Because the question comes then, if that's what you meant, why didn't you say it? Mean what you say and say what you mean, as the saying goes. The third aspect that I'm observing from what he's just said, so because 100 or 200 people were there and didn't correct you, does that imply automatically that what you said was right? It's like the story of the commander marching towards the cliff edge of destruction and the army's following behind him. And he thinks that, well, if I was on the wrong path, my soldiers were told me not to continue, and they haven't, so I'm going to continue marching. What he's saying, the premises that he's bringing in every single instance are flawed. They are defective. They are flawed. Seriously flawed, subhanallah. Allah musta'an. So no, everything that he said that precedes that, and whatever he says that succeeds that, is subsequent to that, has no relevance, because the statement is clear. On top of the magic they learned from Suleiman.
On top of the magic they learned from Suleiman, they also learned a magic in Babylon which the angels came with.
Implying that Suleiman taught magic. No one should lose this point. He has attributed in that statement that Prophet Suleiman alayhi salam taught magic. That's from him, not from the Jews who split into two groups and the discussions that ensued afterwards and who he implied meant that statement. No, this is from him, his statement. When we talk about Islamic State, and this is going off at a tangent a little bit, but to emphasize the point, we say so-called Islamic State. Or if we say Islamic State, we talk about the erroneous batil belief immediately afterwards to show that they're a defective group. He hasn't done that. He's clearly stated on top of the magic that they learned from Suleiman.
On top of the magic they learned from Suleiman, they also learned a magic in Babylon which the angels came with.
It's either going to say it's a slip of the tongue, or he's going to say that he meant it was referring to something else, talking grammatically. And if he meant it was referring to something else, he should have said that. Not 15 or so years later when he's been pulled up.
On top of the magic they learned from Suleiman, they also learned a magic in Babylon which the angels came with.
He's trying to do some verbal gymnastics and it's not working. His statement, just stick with his statement. None of this applies whatsoever to on top of the magic they learned from Suleiman. It needs to stick around that. Nothing he said before or after and the explanation that he's given, other than it was a slip of the tongue, And if it was a slip of the tongue, he needs to rectify it was a slip of the tongue. But it's clear that he doesn't remember because he's used or and brought an alternative explanation. So what he needs to do is say it was wrong, clarify that Sulaiman alayhi salam did not teach magic, apologize, and he cannot be obfuscating like he's doing by thousands have heard it and whatever. That's not a justification. That's where in the deen is that a justification that thousands have heard it and no one has said anything to him.
On top of the magic they learned from Suleiman, they also learned a magic in Babylon which the angels came with.
One final observation on Amjad's recording and even the written explanation that he tries to bring. He starts that part of his speech, the clause, with on top of the magic they learnt from Suleiman. On top of, in addition to. No one will argue with those synonymous meanings. On top of, in addition to. So let's go with his statement. On top of the magic they learned from Suleiman, that also connects to the previous clause and is the second thing that they learned in addition to, on top of the first thing they learnt, which was the magic from Suleiman, according to his statement. This is inarguable. No grammarian will bring an alternative explanation. Nobody listening to that statement would understand it differently. So on top of, in addition to, they also learnt something secondary to the primary thing, which was the magic from Suleiman, according to Amjad Rafiq's statement. Using or trying to use diacritical marks like a comma when he's writing and transcribing that part of the speech worsens the situation, because the comma that he's inserted that precedes on top of actually isolates that clause. On top of the magic they learned from Suleiman, there's a comma after that that has remained. They also learned. So that clause has been isolated and it is unambiguous in what he has stated and cannot be understood in any other way.